So we left off talking about the arts and crafts movement and um, sort of the early stages, sort of the fundamental principles behind it, and the work, The Seven Lamps of Architecture by John Ruskin, and how that sort of had a philosophical or theoretical appeal. And then Red House essentially by William Morris, who was both the client and the principal designer for that. But it became very popular pretty quickly, and in the late 19th century, it really took off. And one of the most prolific English architects working in the arts and crafts genre was CFA Voysey. And the example I want to show you is Broadlays on Lake Windemere. This is in Cumbria, England. So this is on a rural site overlooking a pastoral lake, and it dates from 1898. This is Voysey. So he was a very prominent, prolific architect, as I say, working in this genre. Here you can see standing in front of some examples. You can see behind him. This is a photo taken late in his life, but he was very popular in the late 19th, early 20th century when the arts and crafts movement was. And he really worked to create an aesthetic around the ideas that Ruskin and Morris had put out there. And it was somewhat based on this medieval fantasy of what architecture and culture, etc., should be based on. But he did not create as much of a literal connection to, like Red House was almost like it looked like a medieval house would look like. Voysey, was inspired by that idea, but, made modifications to create really what would become a more modern architecture. He really eschewed ornamentation and complexity. He really liked full masses and simple forms and elevations, and can be in many ways thought of almost a precursor to the European modernist movement that would occur in the 20th century. It's not a modernism yet. We're not there yet, but his work was the kind of thing that those early modernists would look back on decades earlier and say, that was pretty cool. We could do something a little better, a little different, but we like where he was going with that. And we'll see examples of that when we get to talking about modernist architecture and pre-modernist like Frank Lloyd Wright. So here is a floor plan of Broadlays, and it has the sort of rambling plan that we saw at Red House with wings that sort of stretch out rather than sort of a rectangular box that we were seeing prior in Renaissance and in classical revival architecture were generally rectangular boxes in plan or footprint. This is something that spreads out across the land, much the way that Ruskin and Morris had talked about. But and it also centers on kind of a great hall. This right here in the center is essentially a great hall, like a medieval great hall. And indeed, I'll show you in a minute, it has a big, what I call the walk-in fireplace. There are other rooms that have these bay windows. You can see the bays in the plan, and these overlook the lake. So the primary view or vista is being taken advantage of here by Voysey. And then there's a wing that's more of a service wing. There's kitchens and bedrooms and stuff that aren't as critical, are tucked away off of this wing. And here is a elevation view from the lake. So you see the 3 bay windows there, really extensive glass that allows, taking full advantage, of course, this great vista. The masses are pretty simple. It still has, like I said, that medieval character slightly, really tall pitched roof with, slate and lots of chimneys because the arts and crafts architects and designers felt that, fireplaces were a symbolic warmth, provided a symbolic warmth to a family in a home. And so we'll see fireplaces throughout these arts and crafts homes, even when they're not necessary. But he uses white stucco. This is a hallmark of Voysey to use this white stucco cladding instead of, the hand-pressed brick that we saw at Red House, and others who would use other materials. And that's what gives it this really sort of clean look that modernists would later really enjoy taking an inspiration from. This is a rendering of it from a slightly different angle. And you can see it's kind of a romantic, when you have these wings that spread out and porches and bay windows and chimneys, it has this romantic, picturesque look to it, right? It isn't just a box with stuff stuck onto the face of it. And this is another hallmark of arts and crafts architecture, that it has this sort of, it's of the land, it's of the site, and it grows organically. And like I say, we'll talk about that even more with Frank Lloyd Wright. This is a view of the entrance. And there are some elements that look a little bit like big heavy timbered construction at the entry portal here, and you can see this plain white stucco with just a little bit of stone detailing around the windows, leaded glass windows. Again, the technology of this era, one put a big sheet of glass in this window sash, but this is a slightly nod to medieval architecture when glass was much smaller, and you fit it together with lead caming, and so you see that in these examples. So this is that great hall or main hall that I was showing you in the floor plan, and you can see that great bay window with an incredible vista out to the natural landscape, to the lake, and then over on the right is this walk-in fireplace. You can see how massive that is, and this was the type of medieval fireplace where people would do cooking, and it was used for everything, warmth and cooking and all that, and it's not necessary for any of that anymore, but it still has that symbolic importance to the space, and lots of natural woodwork. We talked about that with Red House, that instead of just painted wood trim, you would use richer woods like mahogany and cherry and walnut, and you would stain it and let the natural grain come through, and that was something that was meant to look like it was taking advantage of the natural qualities of the material rather than making something fake with paint or faux graining, which was typically done before that. So the most accomplished and most famous of the British arts and crafts architects, no doubt, is Charles Rennie Mackintosh. You might have heard of him. He gets compared to Frank Lloyd Wright a lot, and I think you'll see why if you're not familiar with him. We're going to start with his Glasgow School of Art. Mackintosh was Scottish and was essentially from Glasgow. And his first great commission was to design and build the School of Art in Glasgow, which was kind of the main art and architecture academy of that era, and still is a prominent art and architecture school in Scotland. So construction started in 1897. It went on for a number of years, finally finished by 1909. Here is Mackintosh looking really dapper with his little handlebar mustache and little tie cravat or whatever. And like I said, I think he was immensely talented, and ultimately his wife, Margaret Mcdonald, he met in she was a student at the school, and while he's working on the project, he meets Margaret Mcdonald and her sister. Both were really talented artists, and ultimately marries Margaret, and they were life partners. They were also business partners, and she doesn't often get enough credit for her role. I'll talk a little more about her in a few moments, but the Glasgow School of Art was a solo project by Mackintosh, but it did allow for the connection between the two of them. This is a historic view of it. It sat up on the top of a hill. This is the main facade with the entrance down here sort of in the center of the building. And you can sort of begin to make out that the building slopes down to the right. It's sort of cut off in the photograph there, but it does. And you see it's a stone building. It has references to medieval architecture and medieval character, but Mackintosh, like Voysey, maybe even more so than Voysey, uh, took inspiration from medieval forms and details, but did not copy. Not in the way that Morris did at Red House at all. There's, you can see a little bit of that in it, medieval architecture in it, but he doesn't copy it directly, and that's what makes him special and you know, almost modern, because he's not just recreating something from the past. It has a lot of great iron details. I got a couple of details I'll show you in a moment. But one thing to notice are these massive windows on the facade. And because this was an art studio, there were a lot of art studios in there, right? And, you know, as you know, artists love natural light. This view or this facade is, I think, on the north end, so it allows that diffuse light that artists love. Same thing with architecture drafting studios that you know, they needed lots of light because, again, this is an era before good electricity could provide all the lighting that you would need. So you do need these big windows to light up the studios. Here on the far right, I'll show you a detail of this later. These smaller windows are where the library was. So here are some photos of these in 2009 when I saw it. I got a tour of it. It was, you know, it was a big thrill to finally get to this place and tour it and see it, get some great photographs. This is of the entrance here, and you can see, you know, great stone detailing around the gate and over the window elements here, and all of this iron work over the gate and these little ornaments that are at the windows. I think the next photo here will show you a detail of the wrought iron ornament here. And these are just decorations. He put more decoration and ornament into his projects than Voysey did. He believed in that quite a bit more than Voysey did. And here's the floor plan. So on the bottom is the front elevation we've been looking at. Here's your entrance right at the center. And you can see these large studio spaces that are being, you know, essentially expressed or revealed on the exterior. We don't know. I'm not really sure how in tune he was to Chicago architecture, you know, and Louis Sullivan, form ever follows functions, but he certainly was coming up with the similar ideas on his own. So you got a big studio space, you need big windows, let's express that on the exterior. This is all part of the same movement that Sullivan came up with a catchy little phrase, form follows function, but others are coming to the same conclusions that he was at the same time. The library that I mentioned is over here in the top right. You can see it has these little bay windows that I'll show you in a moment. This historic view is of a different angle, and that shows the library corner. You can see how the grade slopes down, and the library itself is in this space here. So it has these bay windows with smaller panes of glass, so it's sort of harkening back to that medieval character with these smaller panes of glass than what we saw on the front. And here's a photo I took in 2009 showing those windows and the really beautiful stonework. And then the library was the pièce de résistance in here. I mean, most of the school is just plain old studio space, you know, blank rooms where people could set up their studios. But this had really beautiful woodwork. He designed the furniture. This is a reading table with chairs that he designed. And you can see there was a balcony mezzanine that went around, of course, then built-in bookshelves that went around the perimeter of the room. Here's another view from the balcony looking down on the space. Really considered to be one of the masterpieces of arts and crafts architecture in Scotland. I've been using the past tense a little bit because in 2014 this happened. This is the bane of all architecture, fire. And sadly, this happened in the spring. That was near final projects, and one of the art students was working on their project with like a spray foam or something like that. I forget the exact detail. And it was a little bit flammable, and something caught it on fire, and it quickly spread. The building had not been sprinkled, and the fire spread pretty quickly. This is a aerial view of them fighting the fire, and unfortunately the library is right over here on the right, and that's what got the worst of it. And this is the view of the library after that. It just completely was destroyed. You can see those bay windows there in the background there, and you can see the post for the mezzanine that are just charred. Really, really horrific. You know, nobody was hurt, thankfully, but really horrific outcome for the building and this just masterpiece of architecture. This is what the exterior looked like. It was only one side of the building that got the worst of it. Unfortunately, the side with the library, and you can see quite a bit of it was still quite intact. And so, you know, immediately, this is from 2018. Of you, immediately they went right back to rebuilding the, you know, the school said, oh yeah, you know, we're gonna, you know, we have the documentation of what the library was, we can rebuild it, it'll all be new wood and all that, but we can recreate it. So people were pretty, you know, excited at least that it was not a total loss. And they were just so by summer of 2018, they were actually almost ready. They were going to open for fall school classes and stuff in the fall of 2018. And this happened. Another fire. When I saw the headlines for this, and there's like fire at the Glasgow School, I'm like, what are they talking about? That happened a couple of years ago. They're restoring it. It's almost done. And I'm like, oh my God, it happened again. And it happened badly this time. The entire building was completely engulfed. They're still investigating what caused this fire. I think there is thoughts that the contractor might have torched it. And that is not uncommon when a contractor is about to go belly up on a job. They might try to get the insurance out of it. It's just no formal charges have been placed, but that seems to be where they're heading. And it just was devastating. The shell of the building still exists, but it was completely destroyed. Everything inside, all of, you know, most of the ironwork, all these great details have been destroyed. They still have not figured out what they're going to do about this building. So it's just a huge loss. This is one of the greatest masterpieces of architecture in England, and it's, you know, it's unfortunately almost destroyed. So a happier note will be his other project that is considered to be his masterpiece, and that's Hill House. This is in Helensburgh, Scotland. This is a suburb right outside of Glasgow, and dates from 1902 to 04. And in this project, he is partnered with his wife, Margaret Mcdonald here. So here is a photo of Mcdonald. And she, like I say, she was really talented. In this era, women tended to be relegated to decorative arts and interior design. It was extremely rare for them to sort of go into architecture itself. She was probably more than enough talented in today's world, by today's standards, certainly, that she would have probably just become an architect. But Mackintosh, you know, gave full credit to her talent and her contributions. And in fact, many of the things that he is known for are the interior decorations, which really McDonald was responsible for. So even today, she doesn't get enough credit for her role in the firm and in the designs that they worked on together. But he was fully, he gave her full credit. So here is the exterior. And again, we can see it's a little bit like Voysey, in the same genre of Voysey, which we have exterior stucco. It has a medieval character to it without being quite a direct copy of some medieval castle manor. But certainly most people would look at this and go, hey, it looks like a Scottish castle, right? So it certainly evokes that sense. But like I say, other 20th century modernists would look back on this and say, well, this is heading in the right direction, you know, and we're going to take it further. Here are the floor plans. So on the bottom is the ground floor plan. The entrance is off to the side here at number A, and you come in to a hall, a grand hall with a staircase off to the side, and then the living spaces are D, F, and G, and they overlook a lake or a harbor. It has a great vista from that. So just like we saw at Voysey's Windemere house, that he's taking full advantage of the site and of the vistas that the site provides. But it's also a rambling house, just like we saw before. This is not just a box that everything gets stuffed into. The house moves and expands and goes about however it needs to on the site and on the landscape. This is a great detail. I also got to visit this. It's open for tours. This is my photo of the entry gate with, again, more really fantastic wrought iron that he designed. And here's the approach to the entrance. It's a very nondescript entry, right? This is not a Greek colonnade with a portico sticking out. It's just a sort of, oh, this is where you go in, I guess. It's just very plain. There's a little bit of extra detailing around it, but it doesn't scream entrance. And again, we're going to talk about that even more extreme with Frank Lloyd Wright and how he handled his entrances. This is from the back side of the courtyard, and what we're seeing here is the stair hall. And again, rather than containing everything into a box, he lets something like the stair, protrude out in plan, and that allows wonderful windows and light into the stair once you're in the stair. So it's this organic expansion of a floor plan that is a typical element of arts and crafts architecture. And here is that main entrance hall. The stair is kind of off to the right. You can see it going up there. And this is really typical, and like I say, kind of a highlight of Mackintosh and Mcdonald's interior planning, with a lot of exposed beams, these incredible designed light fixtures in an era when light bulbs or light fixtures generally consisted of bare light bulbs in a socket. They create a beautiful fixture that is decorative. The furniture you can see here, this is really typical of Mackintosh furniture. This is the living room, again, very much designed by McDonald, with a more feminine appeal here with a white painted and the sort of soft rose themes in the decoration here. But on the right, you see the leaded glass windows with this incredible vista out down the valley to a Scottish loch. And here's the bedroom, the master bedroom, with a vaulted ceiling, again painted in soft, colors and rose themes that McDonald chose for that. And then even the bed frame, the furniture again designed by Mackintosh, but decorated by McDonald. And this is a really classic ladder back chair on the left here that Mackintosh was famous for. All right, so that gives you a sense of the early origins of the arts and crafts, where it originates, but it soon crosses the pond, as they say, and comes to America and becomes incredibly popular in the United States, in certain regions of the US, especially like Chicago. And a lot of that had to do with Gustav Stickley and his publication, The Craftsman. So Stickley was a huge proponent of the arts and crafts movement, and a little bit like John Ruskin in England, who popularized it in England with his Seven Lamps of Architecture publication. Stickley popularizes the arts and crafts movement in America with his Craftsman. It was a magazine. This is an era when magazines have become really popular. People would, subscribe to them, or they could go to a newsstand and pick it up. And he just filled these magazines with stories of, about art and culture that was contrary to the Industrial Revolution. Again, this is a reaction to the Industrial Revolution, to all things factory produced, to cheap goods. And he talked about quality handcrafted arts and crafts, and about a culture that appealed to a lot of people. They could read this magazine and think, yeah, the drudgery of my life of going to work in an office or going to a factory, I romanticize about a simpler time. And he would have stories and poems in there, but he also had a lot of images of furniture and spaces, especially of residential spaces, that popularized a style that emerged out of it that many people still call the Craftsman Style, which is name is origin by the Craftsman magazine. And we even still call much of the furniture designed, that's our Arts and Crafts American Furniture, Stickley Furniture, because he popularized it so much. So here's a cover from a Craftsman magazine from 1914. And you see it has a little organic, natural cover, and it has a little poem, to inspire a person, give them a little bit of joy in their life, to counter the drudgery of working in a factory, I guess. So here is a print that would have come from the magazine, and it shows, the Stickley furniture that I'll show you in a minute, heavy wood furniture that is handcrafted, not factory produced, and it shows, a fireplace as the central focus point of a room. Again, even though it's not necessary anymore, and even built-in furniture around the fireplace called an inglenook. Here is also right out of the magazine. This is a photographic view of a typical room with a lot of natural woodwork. You see, here's the Stickley handcrafted furniture. A little hard to tell, but there's even leaded glass windows and stuff throughout. So this really helps to popularize this design aesthetic. And then this is the Stickley furniture. So there's a heavy sideboard on the left there with, iron brackets and handles that again evoke more of a medieval handcrafted element, and what became known as the Morris chair, named after William Morris, but produced by the Stickley Company. So he not only had his magazine, but he was producing furniture, and ironically, as this became popular, regular manufacturers began producing this stuff in factories so that it was affordable to the average middle class family, or even working class family. And so the original Stickley stuff was handcrafted, very expensive even today on the auction market, really expensive stuff. But you could buy it if you were an ordinary family. You could buy it cheaper from Marshall Fields, or from one of the Stickley Brothers firms, or others that were just producing it in factories. So kind of an irony here of, as it became popular, it became mass produced, which was the contrary to what they were trying to go against, this industrial revolution. We have a really interesting site locally here up on the North Shore in Lake Bluff. It's a place called Crabtree Farm. This is a photo I took of it on one of my visits. Was built from 1910 to 1913 by Solomon Spencer Beeman, who actually did most of the work at Pullman. Jens Jensen, we talked about Jensen with 19th century landscapes in Chicago parks. He was the landscape architect for this. This is a working farm. It was built as a working farm, but it was built with sort of an arts and crafts aesthetic. And it was later owned by a corporate gentleman who was a corporate president or whatever, so he had a lot of money, and he was a devotee of the arts and crafts movement till he died just a couple of years ago, and furnished all these barns with arts and crafts furnishings. And it's not like a public site where you can just walk in, buy a ticket, and go through, but he would open it up to charitable groups, for group tours and stuff like that. So I've been through several times, and he even built this little bungalow on the site, on the farm, that was an exact reprint of a plan in the Craftsman magazine designed by Harvey Ellis. Harvey Ellis was one of the designers working on the furniture and plans for Gustav Stickley. He would later go off on his own and be a successful architect. But this was from a plan designed in 1903 that was never built until this guy built it at Crabtree Farm, and then he filled it with his collection of Stickley furniture. This is a photo I took during a tour of the Stickley furniture in this Stickley designed, Harvey Ellis designed cottage. So he tried to create an authentic scenes that was being portrayed by the Craftsman magazine. So the other great sort of pure arts and crafts artisan was Elbert Hubbard and his artist collective called the Roycrofters. So here is Hubbard with a really cool hat. And he created this artist collective in East Aurora, New York, which is just outside of Buffalo, and brought in artisans from across the country to his site when he built buildings for them to do, you know, their different arts and crafts. There was a copper shop, and there was, you know, printmaking, and there was ceramics, you know, making pottery and so forth. And they became known as the Roycrofters. And even today, again, on the auction market, you can buy original Roycroft produced goods, including furniture, for a pretty penny. He's actually from Bloomington, Illinois, originally, and he was a mail order salesman for the Larkin Soap Company, which is sort of ironic because the Larkin Soap Company was headquartered in Buffalo, and they hired Frank Lloyd Wright to design their corporate headquarters, and it's one of the most famous Frank Lloyd Wright designs. Sadly, was then demolished in the 1950s, so it no longer exists. But there's this, you know, interconnection here between all these different arts and crafts designers and aficionados. And anyway, so he founded this Roycroft site, and this is I took a tour a few years ago. This is my photo of the copper shop. And you can see he's using this sort of rubble stone construction with tile roofs, and there's the chimney protruding, very much like we were seeing in the other earlier English arts and crafts architecture, rustic, medieval in form or character, hand built, you know, taking stones out of the ground and putting them together, not some factory produced brick or something like that. Although the roof tile is factory produced, so we're already starting to see a sort of a nod towards factory production. And he built an inn because visitors and guests would come here, and, you know, they might be visiting artists, or they might be visitors here to learn about the arts and crafts movement, or to visit with artists and so forth. And so there was an inn, the Roycroft Inn, which is still a functioning inn. You can stay there. I did. And this is the main hall for that, like the reception room or whatever, and you can see it's got the heavy Stickley style furniture. Roycroft was also making furniture, so a lot of this is Roycroft furniture, but it's the same kind of, you know, aesthetic that Gustav Stickley was promoting in the Craftsman magazine and in his furniture lines. And also notice the painted murals on the walls that go around, you know, part of the artistry that existed here. This is the dining room of the inn, and it has the heavy timber trusses, you know, framing the roof. It has, notice the fireplace, of course, gotta have a fireplace, and this one has a Roman barrel arch to it, which was really common in the arts and crafts movement. And here's a couple of details of the light fixtures and some of the art glass windows that were, you know, again, you can see comparisons to Mackintosh, and we're going to see comparisons to Frank Lloyd Wright. They're all part of this same genre. But that'll conclude our lecture on the arts and crafts in general. We're going to see how that translates by Frank Lloyd Wright into the Prairie School next.